Welcome to Lemoore City Council Chamber, 426 C Street. This is the June 9th special meeting. Please silence all electronic devices as a courtesy to those in attendance. Thank you. This is the 5:30 p.m. special session, study session, SS-1, review of fiscal year 2020-2023 draft proposed budget. Ms. Spear.
Sorry, I was expecting a longer intro. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. So this meeting this evening is to present to you the draft 2023 budget. Tonight, no decisions are necessarily made. You guys can ask questions, you can provide direction, but the adoption of this particular budget is slated for next Wednesday at 5:30, right? Yeah. So with that, I will get started. I have a tendency to talk very fast. I've been staring at these numbers for over 3 months, so I might breeze through something. So I don't know, raise your hand, whistle. I'll try to pay attention. So let's get started with the general fund. Oh, Miss Marissa.
Do we have music to it?
No, I would offer to sing, but
No.
that's not going to be wise. Okay. All right, do you have to do it, Miss Marissa, or can I? Oh, okay. So just for the members of the public that might be listening, as council understands, the budget is basically split up into separate funds. The first fund we're going to discuss is the general fund. The general fund is the largest fund that we have, and that's where most of your discretionary dollars exist. So we'll get into that by talking a little bit about how we began the current fiscal year. So the current fiscal year is going to end in just a few short days. We end on June 30th of 2022, but you have to know where we started to understand where we think we're going to end. So the general fund began with a fund balance of 7.9 million. If you'll recall, on April 5th, the auditors were here to give you the audited numbers from fiscal year 21. How fiscal year 21 ended is how fiscal year 22 begins. So we had a fund balance that was much better than we thought, because coming out of 21, we had higher revenues and lower expenditures. So we started this year with 7.9 million in the general fund reserve. All of our expenditures hit that account. And whatever's left over is basically considered your savings account. So we are projected for the current year to receive about $14.9 million in revenues. That's about $1.1 million more than we put into the adopted budget for 22. And that's for several reasons, primarily because sales tax, property tax, transit occupancy tax, which is the tax we receive from people who stay in our local hotels and motels, and our building and planning fees were all higher than predicted. For reference, the numbers associated with sales tax, property tax, those numbers, when we put them into the budget, are not numbers that I make up. We get those from our sales tax consultant and from the Kings County Assessor's Office. So that's how those numbers are generated. Yes, sir.
Michelle, so on the sales tax, am I on? So on the sales taxes, what discretion does the council have over any or all of these?
So all sales tax dollars are discretionary. Does that answer your question?
So does the council have a discretion over local sales tax, right?
The sales tax that this is referencing is our 1% Bradley Burns.
Okay.
So all of our businesses in the town pay their sales tax, and we are allocated 1% of that from the state of California. That's what this is. We don't currently have a local sales tax measure that's approved by the voters.
That's
So
what I
we
wanted to
get,
know.
okay, so we
So-
get the standard 7.25%. We get 1% of that for the sales tax that's generated within our municipality.
Okay, so it's just one of the things that I'm thinking about when we look at this and we look at our revenue. What do we have control over in terms of fees, assessments, or taxes? And I don't need an answer to that right now.
No.
From my perspective, that's when I looked through this, I had questions about
So
what do we have control over. That's all.
It's important, I'd like to piggyback on that, to tell council and the public that your two major funding streams or revenue streams that fund most of city operations are property tax and sales tax. So if those aren't increasing, because that's a very large percentage of the general fund revenue, that's how we become stagnant. So our expenditures are obviously increasing because of inflation and just cost of doing business. But if those two factors don't follow along, that's how we end up in deficit spending. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks.
So expenditures are expected to be approximately 14.4 million, which is approximately $648,000 less than we budgeted. Mostly due to the fact that we budgeted positions that we either didn't fill or didn't fill until late in the year. And so those salary and benefit savings, we get to keep those. And then we had some professional services. So the planning department had about $150,000 budgeted for professional services this year. But we didn't actually get the grant funding in time to do those projects. So those expenditures didn't happen. So that's where you're seeing the savings. So we went into this year with approximately yes, sir.
Sorry,
That's okay.
but wouldn't those positions though, those vacant positions are in this proposed budget though?
Yes, but the
So-
decreased expenditures compared to the budget exist because those positions weren't filled. So those expenditures weren't made this year.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we went into, we estimated that we were going to close fiscal year 22 with a $1.2 million deficit. If all things that we said were going to happen, happened, but we got more money from those different revenue streams and we spent less money. So not only did we close the deficit of 1.2, we actually came out about, or should come out about $500,000 to the positive. So we closed a $1.7 million gap.
Congratulations.
That wasn't me, but thank you. So now we're going to talk about the budget that you guys will adopt hopefully next week. So now you know that coming out of fiscal year 22, we're going to put about $500,000 back into the general fund reserve. So that means that starting next year, so as of July 1, you're going to have a beginning fund balance of approximately 8.4 million. We're anticipating revenues of about 14.4, and in future slides, I'll explain why that's lower than the current year. And then your expenditures are up to about 17.3 in the proposed version. If all of that comes to pass, assuming that everything we plan for occurs, you would have a deficit, we would have a deficit in 2023 of 2.5 million. Please don't panic. That means that your ending fund balance would still be 5.85 million at the end of next year, which is slightly higher than where we thought we were actually going to end this year. Okay, so the following revenues are expected to increase. So we think that we're going to have a slight increase in tax revenues next year, a slight increase for fees for service, and then intergovernmental revenues. So those are revenues that are paid to us by other government sources. So either the state or local agencies in partnership, et cetera. Licenses and permits, miscellaneous revenues, and that includes cannabis, cost allocation, which that's a complicated conversation, but that's basically what every city department has to pay for city services. Cost allocation and fines and fees are expected to decrease, and so are operating transfers. So I want to talk about operating transfers for just a moment because it's going to come up several times. In most cases, the operating transfers that we're going to reference tonight are a result of the premium pay that was authorized by council. The reason for that is when we adopted the 22 budget, we didn't have premium pay budgeted because that wasn't actually approved until after that budget was adopted. But all of those premium pay expenditures have to come out of payroll. So they're hitting the salary category for every single department that has positions employed. So those departments or those funds pay those fees, but then the American Recovery Plan Act funds, the ARPA funds, they transfer into those funds to basically reimburse them. But they look like a receipt on Schedule 1, which is the schedule that shows you how much money every department has received. So you need to understand that's a reimbursement of expenses. The reason why it's less going into 23 is because you're not paying as much premium pay next year. So the transfer in should be less. Overall, you're going to expect to receive about $240,000 less in revenue compared to the current fiscal year. So now everybody wants to know, or at least you should, why we're asking to spend $17.3 million next year on operating expenditures. So 10.4 million is in personnel, 6 million is in operating expenditures. We have $135,000 asset replacement request, $467,000 in capital improvement projects, and a $25,000 debt service payment. So we're going to go into detail about each of those categories in the following slides. But do I have any questions so far before I move forward? From the public?
Yeah, just one question. So when would you come to the council and request or the city manager, when would you come to the council and request a transfer from the reserve into the general fund? What circumstances would?
So well, anytime it exceeds what's adopted in the budget, has to come to council for an approval.
Right.
Unless we're able to move money within a fund. So I'm just going to give a general example. You have the city manager's budget unit 4213, and you have the city clerk's budget unit 4214. And let's say that they each have $10,000 budgeted in expenditures.
Let me stop you right there. So those two categories are state mandated, or that's just the way Lemoore does business?
That's just how municipal finance works. So you have a fund.
When you say municipal finance, according to a government code, or
There are all,
because Lemoore wants to do it that way?
no. There's different rules that have to be followed. It's fund accounting, and that's what municipal
Right.
governments use.
Right, fund account.
Yeah.
Okay,
So you have a fund, and I'm glad you're asking because public probably doesn't understand. You have a fund and you can, I don't know how you, like, that's the giant bucket, right? And in the giant bucket that is labeled 001, the general fund, each department lives that's assigned to the general fund.
right.
If we're able, we meaning administrative staff, Nathan and myself as the finance director, are able to take money from one general fund department and move it to another, let's just say somebody's going to underspend and somebody's going to over, that does not take council approval. If we're going to move money between funds, so let's say that the water department's like, oh dear, we need money and it needs to come from the general fund, cannot do it without your approval.
Well,
So-
let's put it this way. So if we're operating our household budget,
Mhm.
okay, and I've got my transportation costs and my food costs,
Mhm.
and I'm almost out already. I can go to my savings,
Yes,
which would be considered another fund.
no.
Okay,
You,
Alright,
we
so-
can't touch our savings without your approval.
okay.
The
but-
only way we can do that is through this budget that's adopted. So if you adopted this budget next Wednesday with no changes, you would be authorizing this administration to spend up to $2.5 million of the savings account.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Does that make sense? Did
And
I?
that's what you're proposing.
Yes.
Okay.
So when
Which
I
would
say,
reduce our
res-
reserve.
yes,
Right, which
Okay.
reduced the reserve, and
Yeah.
if for some unforeseen reason, we needed more money beyond that 2.5,
we
it
have
would
to come
take
to you.
council action, we have to come to you to get permission.
That's right.
Yes.
So in a way, it's, I don't mean to belabor this, but it's,
That's okay.
it doesn't seem like we're treating ourselves right in the sense that we've increased our reserves. Okay. And, but our expenses are going up.
Yes,
So we're allocating some of those reserves
yes,
into this year's budget
correct,
and still leaving a healthy reserve.
correct.
Okay.
Yes,
And I guess that's the story that needs to be told, is that what we're doing, we aren't deficit spending.
you have the money there to spend.
That's correct. And so, I mean, that's the negative aspect of what you hear around town is, is the deficit. We're not deficit spending. We have amassed a reserve, taken all the fiduciary issues we need to take into account. And now we're able to allocate from that reserve into the budget to move us forward.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry, because now I
No,
want to
I
just go
just-
one step
I just-
further, because
It's just sometimes we always focus on
right.
the negative aspect of the budget.
To put it more generally speaking, as an individual, if I'm going to spend more money than my paycheck, I'm going to draw from my savings account.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm borrowing, taking out a loan. It doesn't mean I don't have the money.
You're
It's
not going
just,
to a credit card.
correct.
Right.
I have the money. It's just sitting somewhere else.
Right.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
thank you. So $17.3 million we're spending. So let's talk a little bit about, or a lot bit, about our personnel.
Can
Because-
I also add one thing?
Mhm.
And it comes off that. Correct me if I'm wrong, the state of California has or somebody has a limit of what we have to have in the savings account.
To my knowledge, there is no set limit. You set that limit locally.
Okay, ours is set at a percentage and we're above that limit, correct?
So your limit is set by a council from 2015, 15 or
I
16.
think it was after that. but
And the limit, they want that particular council at that time wanted you to have a reserve that was at least 35% of your expenditures. If this budget is adopted, you will be at 32%. But there are plenty of municipal agencies that set that threshold much lower than 35%. So it's not to say that that can't happen. And honestly, we need to be bringing back fiscal policies to this council because they're old, that reestablishes all sorts of categories, not just that threshold. And that's in the works to bring to you. It just hasn't risen to the top
Well,
of
is
the
it,
stack.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, it would be great if we could do those even before we adopt the budget.
Correct. I
You know,
understand.
just to your point, you know, in terms of, you know, taking a look at that and seeing if we want to adjust that in any way.
I can tell
I don't
you,
think we need to eliminate it. I think it's good to have one, but you know, if we need to adjust, that's good.
I don't want to make any false promises. There's no way I will have that policy to you by next
Gotcha.
Wednesday.
I understood
No,
that.
no, I don't.
No,
But
Maybe
I
for next
understand in the
time.
future.
But I
Right.
think, I'm going to speak for myself, but your question, the intent is that we need to approach this in a realistic manner.
Correct.
You know, in terms of what we got going on.
Did that answer your
Yes.
question, Councilmember? Okay. So personnel. Again, $10.6 million or $10.4 million of this budget request is in personnel, and that's just general fund department positions, not enterprise. We'll get to those later. Of that, and we'll get into detail, new positions requested in this budget result in approximately a $417,000 increase to the budget. Amended positions, which means we have either eliminated a position in exchange for another one, or we're asking for a reclassification of position, that will result in about another $100,000 in increased expenditures for a total of about $514,000 for positions. Last year, like I discussed, premium pay wasn't budgeted. So because your revenues and your expenditures are reported as separate categories, it looks like on paper, your expenditures have increased due to premium pay by about $577,000 to the general fund. But keep in mind that receipt that reimburses the general fund has already been posted on the other side. So it just know that when you're looking at the paper, it elevates it by over $500,000. Then we have anticipated health insurance premium increases of $69,000. You all have the discretion tonight to tell me, we don't want you to build in any inflators. I can tell you I do that and have historically done that because every council in the past, when we get the premiums in like September or October, they want to have money there to be able to negotiate with if that became an element. Right now, the cap for health insurance contributions, it's set at 1710. If this council said, nope, take it out because we don't want to increase, you know, I'm going to call it deficit spending, sorry. Councilmember Bornick, but
Savings
if we
account
don't want,
spending.
yeah, our savings account spending, if we don't want to increase that by $70,000, you can tell me to remove, I mean, you can tell me to remove any of this, but that's what that's for. Pension contributions. So every year there's a valuation report done by CalPERS that says yes, sir.
So that is a line item in the budget, anticipated health insurance.
It is in every department that has personnel. You'll see it as account, sorry, bear with me. It is listed as account number 4140 and each of the budget units.
We couldn't just have a general category called benefits?
Our benefits are broken down by type. So retirement, health insurance.
I know,
That sort of
but
thing.
couldn't you have benefits and then retirement benefits, health benefits?
So in what regard? Because when we go to actually adopt this budget and we put it into our actual system to make the payment, when we go to process payroll, which is where these payments come out of, it actually gets processed to a separate account so we can track
I know, but
exactly
you're-
how much.
That's you know,
You'll have to forgive me. I don't quite understand the question.
I mean, how much of the budget do we want, so what you're saying to me is we're approving every line item for every department in the budget we approve, in theory or in reality.
In theory, you could, so
So why couldn't we have a general category of employee benefits?
that
Period.
you don't want to spend a maximum number than X on employee benefits? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just, in terms of categories, we're having, we have a line item in our anticipation of health insurance premiums.
It does
Why-
not
why is
appear
it-
that way in the
Why-
budget.
Why is it anticipation? Why isn't it just health insurance, period.
No, so it is health insurance,
I don't- I-
Councilmember Gornick, if I'm tracking you correctly, each department has a 4140 line, that's health insurance. All she's calling out here is of that health insurance number you see in your budget book, she added a little bit of an inflator to the tune of $69,000 to the general fund, because we won't see our health insurance premiums till September, or October. So if we budget exactly what they are today, that's going to trigger us to come back to you and say, hey, our healthcare just went up by 4, 6, 8, 10%, and we'd have to readjust the budget versus here we're saying we added a little bit of cushion because we know
Well, we
we're going
don't,
to
we
get an
don't have to
increase.
readjust the budget. What we do is go to our savings account and increase and transfer that amount into that.
But that has to come to us.
That,
Mhm.
Yes.
We have to do
Yeah.
that.
but that's
Or
a,
this is giving them the power for us to do not medial, but for.
But, well, in reference to the discussions that we've had about anticipating increases, okay,
so if you,
recently.
okay, so let me put it to you this way. I'm not trying to be obtuse. I'm just
No,
trying
I'm
to
not
figure out how
either.
to
I'm
make.
just- I'm just-
So if this council at any point after this budget is adopted says we're not going to increase the cap, right? Because that's what we're talking about.
Well, see, that's my point. Is that what we're talking about?
It is and
So
it
why are we
isn't.
talking about it? Why are we talking about it in?
Because
this
the city
approach?
still has a proportional share of the increase that we have
Correct.
to fund regardless.
But
Yes,
is it in a general category of increases, or is it? It's a difference. Well, I'll talk about it later,
okay.
closed session. Okay.
Well, I'm actually,
I don't want to talk about it anymore because I'm going to get in a closed session.
This,
no, Frank,
You
this is
understand,
where,
Mary?
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay, so each year PERS tells us per contract type what the city's contribution is for every employee's PERS contribution. So based on the figures that are going to be valid for 2023 and our personnel requests, our PERS contributions will increase by about 86.5 in the general fund. We also have an increase in unfunded liability. So the current year, our total citywide unfunded liability was 1.13 million, I believe. Next year, it's going up to 1.35 million. So it's increasing by just over 200,000. But that gets allocated to each fund proportionate to the number of personnel that are in each fund. So the general fund's portion of that increase is 126.5. So, and that gets budgeted through the salary and benefits portion. So all of these increases is 1.4 million. So almost 1.5 million of the, we'll call it the out around, that $2.5 million savings spend. Over half of it is coming from personnel requests. So now let's talk a little bit about the personnel and the positions that we're requesting and what the actual burden to the general fund would be. So on the left, you see the new positions we're requesting. We're requesting an additional management analyst that would actually be split between human resources and public works, which would be a total cost of the general fund of approximately 108,000. That is because we have some finance issues that we need to solve when it comes to payroll and internal controls on who can touch and see what and manipulate what in order to be more, what's the word I'm looking for? Regimented in our process so that the auditors are happy with the way that we do business and it reduces your fraud risk. We do not have a fraud. Nobody said we're fraudulent right now, but it's just one of the things we can implement to make ourselves cleaner.
Is that a
And
one time?
no, we're asking to put this in the budget year over year.
it's a new position.
It's a new position. And then that other person would work, that same person would work part-time in public works. And that's because we have so many public works projects that are happening right now that have grant funding and in Department of Industrial Relations requirements that our singular management analyst that works on those 5 divisions needs some assistance.
currently today, right now, we have a $40 million grant went in last week to FEMA. We're working with the EDC on another $20+ million grant, and we're working with the DOJ on a grant for maybe potentially up to $9 million for infrastructure upgrades in town to continue to grow to the north. So all those projects, once we, if and when we get the grants, then you still have to administer the grant and all the payroll stuff. So that's kind of the management analyst will be responsible for administering those grants and hitting the reporting requirements and those things.
So are those funds come from some of the grants?
No, we're requesting that this come from the actual general fund because those grants have not yet been approved. And we also want this person to work on streets related projects, which are typically not grant funded. They're general fund funded projects. We're requesting an additional police officer for the police department. They've been holding pretty steady for the last couple of years, but with the developments that are coming online, they'd actually like to increase they've indicated that they will be asking for an additional body every year for the next 4 years because they need to add an additional beat to their actual patrol cycle in order to make sure that they're not understaffed on each shift. That will be about 108,000. There's a request for a community services officer. So right now you have 2 full-time CSOs that do code compliance and things of that nature. They're asking for a third. Building inspector. So we have a building inspector request, and this is slightly different, and we'll talk about the other request in a minute. But we have so much building happening with the Lemoore projects and some of these other developments that have come to you all for approval that our 2 building inspectors are having a hard time keeping up. So they'd like an additional body. The range is listed there because with building inspectors, you're more often to get somebody who has experience in the industry. And so they could come in as a classic PERS employee, which would cost us more money than if they were a pension reform PERS employee. So it's somewhere in that neighborhood. Currently in the budget, we have it at 125,000. So IT manager, we're not requesting an additional position. As you know, you guys have approved 2 positions in IT. This is a request to reclassify the existing position into a manager position due to the nature of the work. So there was a request made to evaluate this individual's workload and the types of services he's providing as an analyst. And the work that he's providing is actually manager level, not analyst level. So the net change would be approximately $25,000 over the course of the year. Just to give council an update, we had really struggled to hire that second position. We were actually able to hire it yesterday. We had an individual accept today. And so we're just waiting on background documentation, but we're hoping to have that position filled in the not too distant future. We are requesting a junior accountant. Currently in finance, and I'm not talking about utility billing, I'm talking about finance. You have a manager position, an accountant position, half of my position, and an account clerk. We are going to be bringing council a purchasing policy that is much more robust than the policy we currently have in order to meet federal and state guidelines and at the request of our auditor. That's going to require somebody whose full-time function is to make sure that we're adhering to those policies and making sure that the process flows. In addition, we have had some significant staffing challenges in finance as of late. Our finance manager accepted a position with another agency, and we have another personnel issue occurring. So we are dangerously short-staffed. So we've actually had to delay our implementation of the financials until we basically went dark since the middle of May. We should start back up again in July, but I would like this individual to be a primary implementation team member that can help us with the implementation of the GL portion. We
So,
won't,
hold on a second.
go ahead.
So we've suspended the implementation of,
We've delayed it. Yes.
delayed it.
We will start training again in July.
So if the way our budgets are set up, everybody has a piece of the pie. Right?
Yes. Mhm.
So if I'm Frank over there and I need 10 acres of asphalt. Okay. This new system, can I order that? I've got the money in my budget.
Yeah, he can do that now. It's just done on paper. The system will make everything electronic.
Okay. So the
So,
approvals will be electronic.
correct.
Okay.
Mhm. And that's, so
Order
let
it
me
now,
explain to you. So I'll explain I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'll explain briefly what this process has been like. So we started in February. We have 3 primary members that were part of the implementation team where we learned what the software could do for us. We established how we wanted it to work for us. And now we're at the point where we're getting in and actually building the system with our new chart of accounts. The chart of accounts is every fund number, every account number, every sub-account number, any number you see in this budget, that we can't use the same numbers, right? So everything's getting rebuilt. So that is the portion that will hopefully go live in January. But in order to get there, I have to train internal staff and they will come on site to help us minimally. But the way this process is designed is that we become train the trainers. Right now, those 3 people became 1. It's me only. That's not sustainable because the number of hours required to go through the training is excessive. So I need at least 1 other body to help go through that process. So that way, when we get to the end, like November, December timeframe, we have another person that's trained up as a train the trainer to help train everyone else. That is basically the necessity of this position, in addition to what I would like that individual to do as their full-time position once we are implemented, which is exactly what you just described. Managing that whole purchasing process, it'll be electronically at that point, but that whole process and evaluation against the policy. The last one is a request for a building and recreation manager. This is a reclassification request of the building official position. So right now you have a building official that is solely responsible for serving as the building official and supervising the building inspectors. We have some shortfalls in supervisory level positions in the organization, and we need to assign a supervisor to the recreation department. So we're requesting that we create this position as a manager, assign it a range 88, which will, 112, which we'll bring back to you on the 15th if you agree to leave it. And that's going to allow this person to continue their role as the building official, but also serve as a manager for facilities maintenance, potentially, and recreation, to kind of bring all of those things together. That would be a net increase of approximately $64,000 compared to fiscal year 22's budget.
So when you say building and recreation manager, what building are we talking about?
Building inspections, facilities maintenance, which is like building maintenance, and then the recreation department.
So this person would also have, with these community service officers who do code, they don't report?
No,
to
because
them?
they report to the police department.
Yeah, but I mean, they're dealing with codes, they're dealing with buildings, right?
So different buildings. I'm talking about the facilities maintenance department that makes sure that all of our,
So it's
You know,
buildings inspector.
the building inspector portion is the inspectors that physically go out to a construction
Right.
site and inspect homes and make sure they're being built to code. That is not what our CSOs do.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a lot of numbers. Just know that I'm going to help explain these as we move through this slide. But in the past, we haven't always called out, just because it's a lot of data, where the increases lie in the operational budget. This is not all inclusive, because you could go down the list of the 23 accounts in any one given budget unit and see that one or more of them is increased by a negligible number. So I'm calling out the big hitters, for lack of a better word. So the column on the box on the left is the number of departments within the general fund that saw an increase in operating expenditures. And I'm not going to say them all out loud because that's a lot of numbers. And on the right, you see the departments that saw a decrease. And now we're going to start talking about why that is. But generally speaking, the overall operational expenditure request compared to this current year's budget is $738,000. So in the city manager's budget, you'll notice that there has been an increase primarily in professional services, and that's due to a request for an economic development consultant and the addition of budget development software. So Nathan and I believe Mayor Pro Tem Matthews went to ICSC, and while they were there, they met a consultant that provides extensive economic development consulting services, where it's more than just seeing where your stop loss is. Like, it's more than just saying, well, you're hemorrhaging this type of service to another agency. They actually help you find businesses and vendors to fill your vacant spaces. by doing an analysis of your demographics and actually physically reaching out to those business types to see if they're interested in coming to town, including getting multiple people or multiple businesses together to fill large spaces similar to a Kmart. In 2009, I believe, the city used a company called Buxton and Associates to do a retail analysis of where our leakage lied, like what service categories were we basically sending money to Hanford or sending money to, it's in every category, right? But that study, I don't remember, and I'm not going to even pretend to throw out a number, but it was in the tens of thousands of dollars, did nothing to help us fill those voids or to bring people to town. This consultant would help us do that. The budget development software is something that is separate from what Tyler Technologies will do. So Tyler Technologies is the software that's going to operate our entire GL. That's where all of every transaction is going to hit that software, and it's going to make our balancing our books so much simpler because we won't have 5 different platforms. We'll have a singular platform. But what it doesn't do is build this book for you. We do that manually. We export everything from the system and then turn it into Excel files. It takes forever. This company actually partners with a lot of Munis services. So Munis is the platform we're purchasing through Tyler, and you build your budget in this new platform, and then you import it into Munis. This company develops an intuitive budget book, for lack of a better word, that you post to your website. You can also print a physical copy where it has graphs. Citizens can hover over it with their mouse and it'll give them all the detail that supports the graph. They can drill down to very specific categories without us having to build it from scratch. It will also assist us in salary and benefit projections, capital improvement project, actual complete plans that we can go out 5 to 7 years, and it will actually draw from the information it already has in your general ledger or your COA and tell you, if you wanted to approve these 7 projects, this is what your fund balance would be at the end. And it gives you a scale and it says, okay, well, now you're in the red, so go ahead and tap these back, and it shows you when you're within your budget. We do all of that by hand currently. It's a constant going into every fund, every expenditure account to see where we're at, because our current software does not afford us the opportunity to do that.
So who has to develop the budget development software? Who builds that?
The software is already built. They will work with us.
Who imports the data?
So they teach us how to import the data.
So that's another task. When you say us, who does it? Is it him?
It would be our IT personnel. So basically you take whatever you build in this budget development software, turn it into a CSV file and import it into Munis.
And you're telling me that the software that we purchased doesn't do this for us?
It does not do the book building or the CIP project book building. You can build your budget in Munis, but it doesn't extrapolate into a form that anybody would be able to get on and see. We would still be forced to actually create a book like this at the end.
I was on their website a couple times and I thought I saw that service in there.
So I thought I did too, but I double checked and I contacted them. This is probably about a month ago when this company reached out to me, and it's confirmed that they do not have budget book building modules. All it is budget development, which is not technically the same thing. So that's the city manager ask. City clerk increase is because starting in July, we're running elections for districts A and C. So that's why that's up. Community development has seen an uptick in legal expenses, and that's because they have more projects that are going to the planning commission, and all of that documentation is reviewed by the city attorney before it goes. So there's an uptick there. Facilities maintenance, this one's interesting. So last year, or I should say this year in the current budget, there were 2 different budget units. There was facilities maintenance and there was parks, but we outsourced all the personnel for parks the year before. So what we decided to do is eliminate the parks budget because it's all handled and operated and maintained by facilities maintenance. So anything that was in parks came out of parks and moved into facilities maintenance. It's not actually an increase. There's actually a savings year over year there because we're expecting to spend less money. It just looks like an increase to this budget unit. Police, you saw a huge increase in lease payments and upfitting of police vehicles because they have far gone getting new vehicles at the level they've needed for several years. So this year there's a request for 5. If you'll recall, city manager came to you in the past and asked you to approve an agreement with Enterprise where we lease vehicles now instead of purchasing them because long-term, it's actually cheaper for us. So rather than seeing an actual cost to purchase a vehicle outright, you're going to see an increase in lease payments. And that's the lease payment that would be due on each of those vehicles throughout the year. And then we have to pay to upfit them. So that's the cages, the lights, the sirens, and the decals, the painting, all of that. You also saw a significant increase in the request for equipment. That's largely due to the fact that for the last several years, they have been working out of their inventory reserves. So they haven't been requesting nearly as many office supplies, ammunition, things of that nature, because they've had the stock to use. They no longer have a reserve stock. So now we're going to have to purchase this stuff. And obviously it's 2022 and things are more expensive than they were in the past. If you guys want a complete breakdown of where the increases are, I can get that to you, but I just didn't bring that this evening. This is way too much talking for me. Okay, Public Works Administration. We have an increase in the engineering services for Public Works, and that's because anytime we do a CIP project for engineering, for Public Works, whether it's water, wastewater, streets, any of that, there's an engineering cost to that. And so if we're doing engineering services through our consultant and it's for somebody else's project, like a subdivision, then we get reimbursed for that. But if it's for our own projects, we don't. So you've seen an increase. Thank you so much. You've seen an increase in engineering costs anticipated for both Public Works and streets for that reason. Recreation. Oh, I should have taken this out. Look, I found a mistake. So we had budgeted $18,000 this year to do fireworks this 4th of July for the community, but we didn't actually contact them in enough time to have them here by July 4th. So if we do it, it would be in the 2024 budget. So look, I just saved us $18,000 in the general fund. And then we're running more programs in recreation this year. So they've seen an uptick in their operational expenditures and operating supplies because of things like jerseys and whatever the case may be. Information technology saw an uptick. We have a couple of servers, computers, things of that nature that they're at the end of their useful life. And so they're part of a process where we have to replace them every so many years. And so there's more of that happening this year than in the past year. And then for these positions that we've requested, there are additional pieces of equipment we need so they can do their job. That's what that's for. Human resources saw an increase in operating expenses, and that's, operation supplies. And that's because we have so many vacant positions and we're doing so much hiring that we're having to buy more product to run our tests, to put our flyers out, that sort of thing. And lastly, the previous 2 years, we have not budgeted the employees home buyer program. Council is aware of it for members of the public. There's a provision in the MOUs and in the personnel guidelines that says that if you're a member of the city employment, then you are entitled or have the ability, if budgeted, to ask for home buyers assistance, which for any non-sworn personnel is $10,000. And the exchange is if you stay employed for 10 years and you live in the house for 10 years, it's forgiven to you. If either of those two things changes, you pay that back. For sworn personnel, the threshold is $15,000, but for 2 years, we have not funded this line item because of our savings spending. So now this year we've put it in and that's a $50,000 ask. So just keep that in mind, that that's something that, is a benefit to our employees, but is not a necessity, but it's in here.
Michelle, you had mentioned if one of those two things changes in 10 years, they have to pay back, but they pay back prorated or the full amount?
Prorated. So the clerk can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but the current lien documents say that if you received a $10,000 loan, then you're forgiven $1,000 for every year that you live in the house and you're employed. And it's $1,500 if you received a $15,000 loan.
Is it the same for the sworn officers? It's 10 years or?
Yes, 10.
And we're, has it always been 10,000, 15,000?
It was, I believe it
it
was
was
10,000.
10 for everybody until I believe 3 years. The last year we did the program through the negotiations process, that increased to 15,000 for
Sworn.
the police bargaining unit.
So is this a board policy? Or is this
It
Pardon me?
is written in the MOU and in our personnel guidelines, but the language says if budgeted. So if we don't budget for it, they have no right to the benefit.
So I guess my question is to you, Mary, is this something that a council could do as a policy? Establishing a home buyer program?
So are you saying outside of what's been negotiated in the MOU, just regardless of MOU, council could create a policy? Yeah, council could create a policy doing it, but I would just caution you against doing that right now, since you already have MOUs in effect that address that
Oh, yeah,
provision,
I would.
but sometime in the
Yeah,
future.
sometime in the future. I'm just thinking of the whole recruiting aspect
Yeah.
of things, and as opposed to the, this is an additional benefit that.
So setting a policy that makes it more a given benefit than a what if.
Tuition
Yeah.
assistance, home buyer program, things like that.
So tuition, just because you brought it up, tuition assistance is provided and that is a given. So that's budgeted every year. So that one isn't dependent on any, it's in the MOUs and in the personnel guidelines,
Right.
but we have to fund it.
Gotcha.
Now, is that, it's 50,000 total
For which one?
for the home forgiveness, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's total.
15,000 for certain bargaining units and 10 for others.
No, I understand that, but the total budget is 50,000.
Oh, yes, 50. I'm sorry, I heard 15. Yes.
That's what we're
50,000.
asking for, and
Mhm.
it's a first come, first serve.
Correct.
So if I've been here working here 2 years and now I want to live here, can I apply for this program?
Yes.
Well, if we say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we approve the budget, yes.
Yeah, after July 1st, if it's still in the budget, yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm. You have another question?
In the past, do we know off the top of your head, how often have we used that?
In recent years that I can remember, when we've funded it, it's never gone over 50,000. As far as the request is concerned.
No, have we always used it?
Oh, yeah, we have people that want it all the time.
We have people on the program?
Mhm,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, this is something that employees call us regularly and say, when are you gonna bring this back? Because I really love to live here, kind of a thing. Which is why we put it in, because we feel like it's important.
And it's 50 grand?
It's 50 grand. Mhm. I mean, you can make it 100 if you want, but right now it's 50. Okay. Okay, next we have asset replacement requests for general fund. So this is in addition to, like, the new equipment is budgeted as an operational expenditure. If it's replacing an existing asset, it's an asset replacement request. Okay, so several months ago, Captain Ochoa is gonna be really mad if somebody has to date, but we had a canine officer whose dog needed to be retired for health reasons. And so the police department is looking to basically replace that asset with a new dog. Approximately $15,000. That's the first request. The second request is for, I realize this is a picture of a dump truck, but my icons were limited. So there's a bucket truck replacement request. And there's been some debate about what to call it. It's the truck with the boom on it. That was the truck that was destroyed in the water incident last June. So the expenditure lives here because this is ultimately the department that truck belonged to, but this is a reimbursable expenditure once we receive insurance reimbursement for this. So just know that that's not, it'll be a net wash.
How about the did our garbage truck survive the rollover?
Oh,
Yeah, we're still getting
Yeah.
quotes to repair that. I think if they're not all in, they're only waiting on, I think, one more quote, but it looks like it will be repaired. Yes.
So we've been down one garbage truck.
Yes.
yes. We
do-
had
We do keep a
some,
backup, to run route. So, but yeah, we've been down hard on this one for a while. And we haven't started on it yet.
okay. Now I'm gonna move on to CIP. Any question about the dog or the dump truck?
The
Bucket
dog kind
truck.
of looks like
It's
it's
a
half
bucket
cow.
truck, not a dump truck.
I know that. There was some discussions internally about, is that gonna make sense? No, but it's cute. Okay, so capital improvement projects. These are the 5 capital improvement projects that are currently budgeted that would attach themselves to the general fund. So let me just briefly describe them. The sidewalk repair program is currently budgeted at 50,000. That's for residents whose sidewalks are lifting, can
It's a
get
secret program, right?
totally top secret.
I know. I figured-
Nobody knows how to
Nobody
get
knows
the
that.
application,
Nobody knows.
right? And we try to keep it that way. So I'm sorry, you were joking, right? Because I was. Okay, so $50,000 proposed to be allocated so that if they go and get a quote, they can get reimbursed up to $2,500 if they use a licensed contractor with a business license in Lemoore they cannot do it themselves, correct? Mr. City Manager, I don't remember.
No, if they need a licensed contractor, if it gets into the curb and gutter, if it's just the sidewalk, I think as long as they've proven that they can pour it to within spec, we go and inspect the pre and post, that we're not requiring a contractor, because we do have some handy people. We're trying to get sidewalks repaired. And you can get more work done if the residents honestly can do it themselves.
Right, okay,
Well,
so Frank Rivera says that is accurate, and I believe him.
What would you prefer, Frank? A contractor to come in and do it or the resident to do it? Yeah, I know. I know. Just,
So for the record, since it wasn't on the mic, our Public Works Director says that he would prefer they use licensed contractors because Michelle Spear is not certified to pour her own concrete. That's not really what he said, but I'm really not. Okay. Parking lot repair. We have a city parking lot behind Tadeo's and behind the fire station that is in serious need of repair. So there's $100,000 budgeted for that project. That was actually budgeted in the current budget, but the project didn't get done. So the expenditures are going to happen next year. So we put it over there.
so, but they just recently did some stuff behind Tadale's in terms of the slurry on their stripe. Then they do something in Bank or
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo. Okay, so for the record, Wells Fargo did some work, but that's not the city's work.
Okay, so our parking lot is the one that's west of that then? huh?
Yes.
Yes.
With the trees in the middle.
Yeah, yeah,
up there,
okay, yeah.
That's coming. up.
And it needs work
Bad,
that's
bad work.
more substantial than a slurry. Is
Yeah.
that what I
Oh,
heard?
yeah.
Oh,
Frank?
for
Okay.
sure.
Okay. I'm just
Like a
repeating
big
it for the
one.
record.
Yep, yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next, we have the citywide ADA project of $100,000. So we have an ADA plan that says, hey, city, these are all the things you could work on. So this is $100,000 because we need to be able to show that we are continuing to chew through that. I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar project if you did it all at once, and we obviously can't afford that. Next, fancy abbreviation is the State Homeland Security Grant Project. The fire department applied for the 2020 Homeland Security Grant. They were awarded that grant. They just can't spend the money yet until the state tells them they can. So they're going to spend that money after July 1st, and it's for rescue packs for all of their firefighters. And that is fully reimbursable, 100%, no matching funds. So that revenue or receipt is also listed in your Schedule 1. So this project has basically a net zero effect to the general fund, but it's listed here, so I'm calling it out. Lastly, we have the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Project, and that is about $150,000 for professional services to do that plan for us. You'll have to forgive me, city manager, but I believe that's because the state requires that every so often you redo your regional housing needs assessment plan, and it's a planning function. So this one, we're on the timetable that now's the time that we need to get that work done. So $467,000 is what is requested of the general fund. So I just want to say that's the end of my general fund presentation, that if you look at Schedule 3 in your budgets, that tells you the beginning fund balance. So what the beginning fund balance should be as of July 1st. Obviously, these are based on estimates, what your revenues are expected to be, what your personnel, operating, asset replacement, and capital expenditures are supposed to be. And the very last column on the right-hand side says, if all of that came to pass, this is where the fund balance would end as of June 30th of 2023. Sorry, took me a second. And so that's basically the roll-up sheet. That's where you'll go to say, hey, if I adopt the budget as seen, and that's where you'll see on the general fund, it tells you,
Yeah.
It's little.
it tells you that your ending fund balance would be $5,835,123. At least I really hope that's what it says.
It does say
Yes.
that.
It does say that,
Okay,
even though there's a
perfect.
magnifying.
But
needed.
it does say 6/30/2022.
Oh, thank you. So I
Right.
gotta change that.
Yeah.
Yep, it does. I saw that. Now, Michelle, I'm gonna ask a question.
Mhm.
The Homeland Security, I think it was Homeland Security for they were for air packs.
No, they're
Rescue.
called RIC packs and they are rescue packs.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I honestly would have to Google it, but
No, no,
it's different than
I
the
know.
actual SCBA air packs.
Okay,
I think honestly, this is like a rescue breathing type apparatus. It's a something, I don't know. I could look it up.
I think it's the chest compressor thing. isn't it?
Chief German, if you're listening, call in. Somebody with us.
He told me,
Okay.
what it was. So
So that is the general fund. So I'm going, you know what, does anybody have any recommendations or questions before I move on?
I do have one adder
Yes.
in
blow it up next
reference
year.
to your question about that refuse truck. I gave you bad information. Insurance gave us the blessing this week and we started repairs.
Well, good. So when do we think we'll be, is it a? we have
6
any-
months. was
There was
guessing.
substantial damage, so I'm gonna say
How about the driver? Is the driver okay?
the driver is
fine.
fine. No one was injured.
Maybe we should do it now.
So I will follow up with you at a later meeting
Yeah,
and give you a
I'm just
timeline.
curious. I'm just, when I saw it on the thing, don't worry about it.
Okay, I was just informed that the repairs are gonna require the assistance of multiple different repair shops, so it's gonna like
Yeah.
kind of move its
Long
way along.
time.
Long
Yeah.
time.
Michelle, did you say that was a rescue pack?
It's called RIC,
Oh, okay.
Rick Pack, and I think the R is rescue.
Okay, I Googled rescue pack and I got Diego's backpack, so that's not right.
That's not it.
Yeah.
Explorer.
It's
That's hilarious.
That's
I
what Bruce
should have
told us
used
at the
that as an
memorial
icon
thing.
on that particular slide.
the jaws of life.
Oh, okay.
the
It was a
battery
missed
operated
opportunity
jaws
for
of-
me to put
It's
an
all
icon.
that rescue. It's pack of rescue stuff.
You know,
Can we make this bigger next year?
Oh, I knew you were gonna ask me for that. Yeah, if you
Like,
wanted to
yeah.
go. on. You know what? Oh, that's a good
Bigger
point.
glasses.
Next year's budget is gonna look so much, like, you're not even gonna be able to compare it. It's gonna be like apples and oranges.
remember, this is a recorded meeting.
I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I was gonna say.
I declined to state.
So-
We'll look into that.
But words matter. And so when we put this, when we have resulting in a deficit of $2.5 million. Okay. What that is, those are needs of the city.
Yes.
It's not a deficit, so we have an increased need of $2.5 million to satisfy the needs of the citizens.
Okay,
Okay,
Over expected revenues.
yeah, over expected revenue. I mean,
I like that.
I mean, to me, a deficit is at the end of the year, I'm done, or at the end of my month, if I'm in the hole, I'm in the hole. Right?
Not if you take it from your savings account.
Well,
Right.
but that's the
Right, right.
difference.
I'm
Optics.
agreeing with you.
It's
Yeah, I
optics.
understand.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah, I concur. It will
Michelle,
be changed.
can we
Yes, ma'am.
take a break from you right now and take public comment? If
Sure.
there's any public
Mhm.
comment for,
Absolutely. Does anybody
thus
online
far.
have any questions or comments or concerns or wish that I had a bucket truck icon?
okay, well, I'll try to give you a little bit more of a break, sorry.
No, that's
So
okay.
When is the appropriate time for us to have it at our next meeting? We'll take action if we want to
I,
increase some of these areas.
I
or-
actually want you guys to have that discussion tonight because my hope is,
We got-
I would like to go to bed at some point, but my hope is that we can get consensus from this group so that I can build it into the budget and show you the revised budget on Wednesday, the 15th, for you to adopt. That's my preference. We don't legally have to adopt until the 30th, but
30th,
please
right.
don't make me wait that long. Because there's like a whole rollover thing that has to
Yeah.
happen. So I built us some cushion. I would hope that you guys would have some of those discussions this evening. So the question I can ask now is, would council prefer to have those conversations about the general fund now and then I move into the enterprise funds? Or do you want to hear the whole presentation first and then come back?
My 2 cents is here at all because, and then we'll go back.
Here it all.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents, but that's only one of,
No, I'm going with that. I can take notes.
what do you think? Mayor Perez?
I think that sounds good.
Okay. I'm gonna keep going.
Even though we already had 3, we really didn't.
Do you need
but-
another water, Michelle?
I might in a minute, but right now I'm all right. Okay. Let's see.
Could maybe do you need a break at all? I mean, you've been talking for an hour. That's a long
Exactly.
time. Do we want to
Yeah.
take like 5 minutes to stretch
Yeah,
legs? and-
let's do that.
Let's do that.
Okay,
Do I
You'll
need
go,
to
you'll go to bed
flip
tonight,
the
don't worry.
gavel?
I will. Okay.
Say-
awesome.
It may be 3 o'clock in the
Recess for
morning,
5
but
Then
minutes.
So we're
technically
gonna
that's
take-
tomorrow.
A recess for 5 minutes.
Okay.
There you
Perfect.
go.
Marissa, is there?
It's like that podium.
All right, Michelle.
Okay, are we ready? Oh, what happened?
11:59 is my goal. She'll has to be home tonight.
Did you say 11:59?
I'm joking.
Okay. Now we're gonna talk about the special funds. Not all of them, just the enterprise funds and the internal services fund. Okay, so we're gonna start with water. First, we're gonna do kind of a recap of all of them. So, and those are coins, that's not like the Lord of the Rings ring, just in case there's any confusion. Okay, so the water fund started this year with about $5 million in reserves. You can see their projected revenues and expenses. So they're expecting to put about 2.2 million into their fund balance. So they should start next year, fiscal year 23, at about 7.2 million. Refuse started about 1.3 this year and is expected to put about 450,000, so 1.8. Wastewater is going to spin down some, largely for capital improvement projects this year. So they started with 10.3 and we're expecting them to end around 9.7. And then fleet has a negative fund balance. And that's a negative fund balance that we've basically been carrying for quite some time. They actually chewed into that by about, I think, $150,000 in fiscal year 21. Not sure what fiscal year 22 is going to look like yet. The important distinction between water, refuse, and wastewater and fleet is that fleet is an internal services fund, which means all of its revenues come from the cost of services to all the other departments. So all of their revenues come from the internal agency. And if you really should have a balanced budget there. So they should be basically billing out all of their services, which is why we're anticipating that it's not going to change going into 23. So let's talk about the water fund. So again, they had a beginning fund
So,
balance. Yeah.
Just one question on
Mhm.
the last slide. So that ending fund balance, that's what you're anticipating for this year.
Yes. It's really hard to estimate. I actually expect that they're probably going to bill out because of their hourly rate in fleet, because of how that was established many years ago. I actually think that they're going to bill out for their overhead at a rate that's going to allow them to start recuperating some of this money,
And
because
so-
we can't hold negative cash.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so but the ending fund balances that are in water and wastewater. I noticed in wastewater, it was down, there was a net change from the year before. Like,
That's all of this activity that's being reported here is for the current fiscal
okay,
year.
okay.
So we're anticipating that there is going to be an increased need in wastewater of 533,000 because of some CIP projects that were done this year.
Okay,
So, oh, and let me just point this out right now because it'll come up later. The wastewater fund is the only fund of the three that has not had a Prop 218 hearing to increase fees for over a decade. So water had fees increased in 2016, I believe, through 2020. We just did a refuse rate study. We brought that, I believe, to this council last year. Wastewater fees have not been touched, I think, since 2007. So what is that, 15 years? So one of the reasons why you see deficit spending here is because increased need is because we're not generating the revenue from the fees for service consistent with the cost increase in expenditures.
we are bringing more potential fees online with the residential increases that we're having.
Yeah, we'll see more hookups and more
Mhm.
services, but all the big testing out at the wastewater plant for tertiary is taking place next month. So we've been kind of holding off on looking, because once we upgrade the plant and do some tertiary work, we're gonna have to go out for probably a bond like we did with water. So we're looking at all those things now, but yes, as we put more people on, it should increase the amount of money's coming in. But as you'll see in her budget, we're gonna spend a substantial amount of money on the growth of the city to the north out of this fund to support those projects.
And those will come out of the
Out of the wastewater
Wastewater.
fund balance.
ending fund balance.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Now, when we have, I'm sorry, when
That's
we
okay.
have a slide, like I just noticed the next slide
Mhm.
is a water slide.
Mhm.
We will have one on fleet. I can
Yeah.
ask, okay,
I break them all down.
go.
Okay, so here's water. Water, we're anticipating that the beginning of next year, so in July, we'll start with a fund balance of 7.2. They have proposed revenues for their service fees. That's their primary source of revenue, is the fees that we assess for connections. Interest that fund actually makes, and then operating transfers in, which is in most cases exclusively the fund reimbursement for the premium pay that got paid out, but the money actually came from somewhere else. Proposed expenditures for personnel are 1.6, operating expenditures of 7.2, and then another $3.2 million in CIPs are on the books for next year. So that would leave their fund balance at 5.7 million. So they have an increased need of 1.5 million for fiscal year 23. But just to note, that's still $700,000 more than their fund balance was at the beginning of the current fiscal year.
Well, is there another way of articulating that? As opposed, in other words,
I can do a slide that has like a year over year comparison of fund
or just
balances.
an asterisk with an explanation that, you know, this is not, it's not critical. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, yeah. That's
100% optics.
So personnel and water. One of the requests that's in the budget is for a water conservation officer. So as many of you, I'm sure know, we are in a severe drought, and the governor is issuing executive orders for certain drought protocols. And we currently are not in a position with our current staff to make sure that our citizens are complying with those protocols. So watering restrictions, days and times. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but this position would be designed to make sure that fines are being assessed on our community if they're violating that, because we are responsible for reporting that to the state, so that we are not held responsible. So that would be about $74,000 to the water fund. We talked in the general fund presentation about the the account clerk that currently resides in finance. We have a staffing issue on the utility billing side. So those clerks that are responsible for receiving payments and answering customer calls, right now we only have 2 positions. 3 or 4 years ago, I think we had up to 4. So now when somebody calls in sick or they're on vacation or whatever the case may be, there have been times recently where we have literally had no clerks. So either the accountant has had to cover the front, or we've had to pull from somewhere else. So we're requesting that account clerk that was in finance be moved to utility billing to service that function. That would put 3 full-time clerks at the front for customer support. We eliminated in this budget a water chief plant operator because that individual was licensed to run our system and resigned. We don't have anybody in-house that's qualified to take that job. So we have had to outsource that. So you see a reduction of $165,000 on the personnel side, but you're going to see an increase on professional services because now we're under contract for that. Oh dear. Health insurance premiums, $18,000. Cost to PERS is really only $605 if you mathematically based on the number of people. And the unfunded liability portion here is $10,000. So overall, the water fund budget for personnel has increased $125,000 compared to what we budgeted this year.
But that's including the 2 additional positions.
Yes.
Yes. And I would like to point out to council, we currently in our water fund have over $1 million in arrears for payments through COVID that we are just now starting to recoup those payments. But the actual account right now, balance in water, because we weren't allowed to shut anybody off or take action during COVID, it hit the water fund to $1 million.
So not just the water fund, but
Water,
we
sewer.
had $1 million in unpaid utilities, which is water, wastewater, and refuse. Sorry.
So it's
Okay.
all 3.
The
It's
3,
a
my
combination
mistake.
of all 3. Now, did we apply for some kind of grant forgiveness program through the feds or state?
There's a program that the city has signed up for that the residents can go on and request through a third party. There's some state monies available. And as long as they qualify and give them their account numbers, will be paid directly from a third party individual, but that has to be taken on by
Them.
the residents. Yeah, and we'll put information out, but we have signed up for that program.
We're waiting for final approval. So that way when individuals come in to pay their bills, if they're struggling, we can refer them to that, but we're
Cool.
still waiting for approval on that.
Great.
Water fund operating expenditures has seen an increase of about $7,000 year over year. And that's largely due to things related to our treatment plants. So brine hauling services, so there's gonna be brine that is a byproduct of the TTHM process that we cannot keep here. There's very few facilities in California that will take it. We have a contract with one of them, but due to fuel costs and some other things, that cost has increased pretty substantially. As to have the cost for chemicals that we currently use, but we will be using more chemicals when our TTHM plants are up. And so that cost has been, has increased. And then obviously the contracted CPO services, you saw the reduction in personnel, but it landed here in professional services.
Well, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Question, can we go back to the last slide?
Yes.
So in the additional of a water conservative officer,
Mhm.
do we know if we're not conserving water? Do we have any metrics to tell us that?
Yeah, we know we know what water losses are. I think we were running around 10%. I'd have to double check that we have an unaccounted for water loss of about 10%, or we did at one time. So I think they're working on that though, because we've replaced so many hundreds of meters that number should be coming down. But if you drive around town, you will see people watering on non-watering days outside of the hours, or you can frequently go down the road and see water in the curb gutter.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's going to be the function of this person, is to go out and obviously document, teach, kind of leave the packages, but we do have the
What do
ability.
they do? They do a citation? Do they knock on a door?
Yeah,
What do
so our code allows for penalties of $100 for first time offense and like $200 for second offense and ongoing. So that would be a program that we'd start looking at. The first thing I kind of like PD's approach is education, put it out, but we're going to have to get very real, because the new governor's orders, we can still water stuff that has public benefits, or our parks and things of that nature, and individual residents can still water, but all your commercial properties for like beautification, and like where I live, we do have some green belts and greenways. They're supposed to shut all water off immediately. Medians and town water is supposed to go off, with the exception of UCAN water to keep trees alive. So this is the stuff we need to implement and bring to council, and make sure that our conservation water ordinance and things we have in place are in line with the new governor's order. But we never relaxed our orders for residential watering. We still fall under a severely overdrafted. So we've always stuck to the 2-day-a-week watering for residential. We never went back to 3. So we're good there. But
I guess my point though is if you got a $75,000 figure here, and if we're at 10%, I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number, in terms of water loss.
water cost or water
Loss.
loss. 10% kind of, they want you under 10 for sure.
Okay.
But this is more of,
See, here's what I'm saying. I'm thinking, so is spending $75,000, is that going to get us to 8%? Or is it
I don't
more?
know. I think once we fund a position, have somebody out there and people realize we're keeping track of it. I do think naturally, anytime you start tracking something or scorecarding it, you'll see a 10% improvement. So if we got a 10%, we should see a minimum of 1%.
Well,
That's statistically proven. Anytime you start tracking and enforcing stuff, you'll see a 10% interest just when people, or 10% reduction even when people get the word out.
well, and that's a key point there in terms of getting your word out. I'm wondering if we did a different or a better job of marketing what we want to have focus on, to see what kind of a response we get, as opposed to, because I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
because our watering rules haven't changed in years. I mean, we have Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday watering. You have to water between 7 p.m. and 10 a.m. on your watering days. So this is more kind of just, it'll help both. I think this person goes out with information. We start using our road signs. We do put out the road signs when we'll see like neighborhoods that are really abusing the watering schedule. We usually put our road signs out to remind people of the drought and remind people of their watering days. That has helped, but it hasn't stopped some. I mean, there's
Okay.
people that'll still water 7 days a week.
All right.
So
Okay, so we have already covered this slide regarding operating expenditures for water. Does anybody have any questions about this? Okay. So this is a list of the capital improvement projects that are currently slated in the budget for the water fund for next year. The TTHM project completion. So there's about $1.6 million worth of work that's still left on the contract for that particular project. I can't get into too many details, nor do I think this is the appropriate time, but we are having to go out and rebid certain portions of that work. So this number could go up, but we won't know that yet. So I've just put what was left on the actual contract as it was previously written. The southeast well equipment, this is for the well 15, which is the one behind the county fire station, just on the other side of the golf course. So we put, for lack of a better term, we actually put the well in the ground, but now we need to put the pump in and make sure that we can actually pull water from it. So that's 375,000. Remodel of 40G Street to 100,000. For those of you that don't know, 40G Street is the water headquarters. And the reason for this is related to the last project, which is the SCADA upgrades. So the SCADA system is all the electronic components and the servers and all the things that help us be better at identifying problems before they happen. So we need to do an upgrade to that system. Several weeks ago, you'll know that we had a couple of days where we had some pressure issues. So we need to upgrade SCADA in order to prevent those from happening and to be notified sooner. We physically don't have enough room in the building at 40G to handle that increased equipment. So we need to do some work there to make sure we can make that equipment fit. Repainting water tanks. So on occasion, our water storage tanks need to be drained and cleaned and recoated with a certain product. That's what this is. Replacing service lines. This is one of those things that we budget for, but it's not always something that happens. So if there's a development in town and we tell the developer to upsize a line that is in excess of what they need for their own development, the city pays that difference. That's where this would come from. And it also is, we have some lead, is it lead pipe? Lead. We have some lead pipe left in the city, so we need to work to try to replace that with newer product. Well rehabilitation. So we service our wells as frequently as money and time allows, but we have our wells on a schedule. So we get in and we make sure that the well is functioning correctly. This money is here in case they find something that needs to be repaired. This is how we ensure that there's money there to do that project. Keep in mind, and this is true for anything, just because there might be a budget here that is, you know, in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, doesn't mean that it doesn't require additional council approval. So our purchasing policy establishes that in almost all circumstances, the city manager has the authority up to 50,000, but any contract that goes above that, whether budgeted or not, comes back to council for approval. So just know that for everything, we come back to you. This is just what we anticipate projects costing. Any questions about these capital projects? Okay. Refuse. For those people that don't know what that is, it's also, it's your trash pickup. So beginning fund balance is 1.8 million, proposed revenues of 4.4, same revenue streams as all the other enterprise accounts. Proposed expenditures of 4.9. So that's 1.2 in personnel, 3.3 in operating, and then there's an asset replacement request that we'll go over. So the ending fund balance is 1.2. And so you would have an increased need next year of $465,000. I can tell you right now that's because of the asset replacement requests largely. So refuse personnel. The personnel is budgeted at 1.2. There's been a negligible increase. Most of the increase that you see on paper is a result of premium pay, which again is reimbursed, but year over year, it's come up about 116,000, and we aren't requesting any additional positions in this particular budget unit. Any questions? Operating expenditure detail. So they actually have a decrease in their operational expenditures of $69,000, which in the grand scheme of things is fairly negligible. And that's due to the fact that fleet is actually the highest payer of fleet. Refuse is the highest payer for fleet services because their vehicles are very expensive to fix and replace, and their fleet has been very old. So over the last few years, as they've purchased new trucks for their fleet, they've seen a decrease in the need for fleet services internally. We have a request from the refuse department for a new street sweeper that is going to replace one of the two that we already have on hand, and that's approximately $387,000. Right now, we don't have any guarantees for any funding to help us with this, but there is a potential that we would get CMAQ funding, which is money that we get through KCAD, I believe, right? To help us at least reimburse a portion of this. That is not budgeted because it has not been guaranteed. So at the point that we get ready to make this purchase, if you approve it, if there's CMAQ funding, you would be notified about that in the council meeting when we bring the purchase request. Any questions about that?
Is there, you said there's one down right now? Is that what you said?
The truck, not the street sweeper.
Okay.
They both function. One of them is really old. That's the one they want to replace. And then they're gonna make the new one their primary, and then their primary now would become the backup.
Okay.
So wastewater, oops, I turned my slide. So beginning fund balance of 9.7, proposed revenues is 3.5, proposed expenditures of 11 million. So this fund has about $7 million in asks for CIP projects, and we will talk about them in detail in just a moment. If you didn't have any CIP requests, this fund would almost be neutral. They would be spending as much money as they receive every year. They'd be off by about 150,000. But there are some significant CIP requests that need to happen in wastewater because there's been, delayed maintenance for lack of money. And then we have some very large development projects that are happening that require our participation. So increased need next year of $7.5 million. That would leave their fund balance at the end of 23 at 2.2 million. This right here is why we discussed earlier about the rate study, because over time that's not sustainable.
So when we take on new developments,
Mhm.
those developments are paying the same fees as a developer 10 years ago.
No, our development impact fees change periodically. So we have 5 or 6 different impact fees we still have on the book. So depending on when the money was collected and where the project takes place determines which account we can pull it from. But our impact fees have gone up or have been changed. I think the last time was
2017.
that Tischler Weiss?
We did a revision, but it wasn't nope, that was master user fee schedule. The last time
It
that
was 5 years ago.
yeah,
It's
diff-
been, yeah.
we're
it is
actually have a consultant working on the data right now specifically for public works projects, but it's not ready for presentation. But
Yeah.
yes, there's a need there for not only service fees to increase, but development impact fees to increase in certain categories, not all of them.
And this is the budget unit that we're currently working with NAS Lemoore and the DOJ on grant money to fund a lot of grant portions of this.
Good.
But I really don't like to budget for what if, so none of that is in here. So if it happens, great. Okay, so wastewater fund personnel expenditures. So expenditures for personnel is 1.1. That's increased because of a request for an additional wastewater utility worker. So that employment is on the collection side. So they work on the storm drain lines and they work on the lift stations. They're not at the actual treatment plant. They're out in the city, like clearing clogs and making sure all the pumps are working. I will say that the wastewater department has seen a very significant increase in people that have taken jobs out of state. They're not leaving us because they don't like us. They're leaving because they don't like the state. So we are actually down several positions in that department. And we are in the process of hiring 3 more right now to fill those vacancies, but we have about 2 more on the way. This would make the second if it was approved, but they're in desperate need of more hands. So about $55,000 for that person. $65,000 in premium pay, and the rest of it is fairly negligible. It's the 3 categories we previously discussed. Year over year increase of about $153,000. Any questions? Operating expenditure detail is up about 665,000. That is due to primarily 4 different categories. The first is the biological stimulant. Many of you probably remember either John Souza or Frank coming to purchase something called the bioenergizer. It's the poo eating bugs. Diego doesn't want me to say it like that, but it's a microorganism that helps eat down the sludge in our actual lagoon so that you don't end up with your water levels rising due to sludge buildup. The cost for that has significantly increased. In talking with Diego and Frank, I asked them point blank, is the cost worth the service? And the answer is absolutely yes. Like to drag those or to do something else would be cumbersome and likely more expensive. Line reimbursement for development, same theory as water. This is just on the sewer side. The freeboard survey. So on our lagoons, obviously there is liquid that's in the lagoon and it's like on top of the sludge that's on the bottom. And this freeboard survey is going to go through and do an analysis of all of our canal banks that are around the lagoons, identify where our low spots are, and that if there was a emergency, an oh poop moment, we would know where it's likely to go over the wall so that we can focus our efforts on building up those areas. It also puts a marker out in the lagoon so that with a little, that's calibrated with the red zone. So if you get into the red zone, it's a problem. And so we need to do that survey. It's about $60,000. Every year, cost allocation and risk management affect the departments at different levels because those cost allocation mechanisms are changing based on stats from the previous year. It just so happens that for this particular year, the wastewater fund is going to see about $160,000 increase. So it was significant enough that I needed to point that out. Those are charges for service and for coverage that the city has to have.
Are any of those lagoons lined?
I think
Just percolate. Okay.
I just want, Diego, did I explain that correctly? Okay, I practiced. Okay. Here are the 9 capital improvement projects that are slated for the wastewater department or fund. I am going to completely butcher this if I try to explain what all of these are for, but I will tell you that the lift station 9A upgrade, is there like a thing? This, oh, it's not showing on the TV. That's sad. The $2.6 million project, that's one of them that we are actually in discussions with the base on to see if that's something that they will pay through federal funding. Any of these that have lower dollar values, like the $80,000 or $90,000, that means that we're really just in the engineering phase of that project and that you're likely not to see the cost for construction until subsequent years. The trunk line improvements to Lacey Ranch, my understanding is that this 380 is not necessarily the full construction. This is like to engineer the system that we're gonna need to support that many houses on the north side, because right now we do not have the infrastructure to support that. Does council have any specific questions about any of these? Because I would be happy to have Mr. Rivera or Mr. Lopez come up and explain them to you.
Is there just on the high school projects and even the Bellhaven to College projects, are there any ways they can help you?
Well, we call it Lemoore High School because we have a basin by the high school.
Right,
It's really all city property and we have not asked them. And then
because we got the lift station, we put that in just west of 41 there by
the college.
yeah, and also on the other side.
Yeah, well, in this storm drain line, because there's a section of the line that goes from, I think it's 36-inch down to 12 or 18 that runs through some personal property and then out. And we've had issues in past years sending that water out to the wetlands. So we've been diverting for years more water south. Well, now that we've got some of that land tied up, we need to upgrade, and this will put all the storm drain adequate sized and put it in the roadway and not through private property out to the west side of town to the wetlands area.
What roadway?
I think it's, well, what's the road that runs on the south side of the college? What road is that?
Future Peterson Road. It would connect Bellhaven to
Gotcha.
College.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just putting it on the record.
Okay, so it's going to go on the road or it's going to go on the drain?
Right away.
It will be located in the road.
Well, why would we put it in the road?
Is this our right away?
Right away.
We don't have to worry about private property, I'm sure.
No, but you're going to have development out there. You got Lennar out there. You got more land to be developed out there. Why would you put it in the road? Why not put it?
Any canals you see is usually in a public right of way. Some of the canals that we've underground, like in front of our Cinnamon Municipal Complex, that one is like behind the curb. We will be doing another project, the Lacey Ranch, it's an open ditch. And so it's kind of right now in the backyards of the existing subdivision and goes into the roadway until it gets into Hanford-Mono Road and then meanders through the city. So it's easier to maintain because once it does go underground, it becomes the responsibility of the city to maintain it. So we want it to be within our right of way.
So it's a city street though.
The city, the right of way is a city street.
Okay,
Yes.
so you still have the responsibility of maintaining that street.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, in some cases, we put it, in one case, the Lacey Ranch will be part of a pathway.
Pathway, that's what the
Yes,
developer talked about
right,
there. Okay,
Yes.
good, thanks. Rick.
Any other questions about any of these wastewater CIPs before? Yes.
Do we have in here maybe I'm speaking out of turn, about, I'm gonna say the word wrong, treasures,
Tertiary?
tertiary water? Do we have to, is there anything that we have to fund to pay for any kind of pumps or anything like that to do what we,
So right now, the operating budget of wastewater is paying for everything we're doing to date. Once we get an approval and then go, then we would absolutely have to come back, and that's when we'd have to talk strategies on how we want to fund a tertiary plant. The last week, the state is in contact. We're still really close. They had a couple clarifying things. They want the engineers, but it looks like we're going to be able to use our water as is for the cannabis oil crops. So that takes the demand for tertiary way down on our part. So instead of trying to tertiary treat 1 million gallons of water, we can probably come in with a smaller system, say 500,000, and that would take care of all the golf course needs type thing. And so we can shut those wells off and eventually extend out, and it'll be built modularly so we can increase. But yeah, we'll have to figure out how to fund that. We're not counting any of the new wastewater upgrades, and we are a lagoon system percolation. I think there's only like 21 of them left in the state currently. So we're getting close to the end of life cycle, and we'll have to absolutely upgrade the plant.
Mr. Olson, I just want to make sure I'm clear, because in their book, it tells them more information than what is on the slideshow. So if the tertiary water, the tertiary water is tied to the wastewater treatment plant, correct?
Yes.
That's how we're going to get tertiary. Okay. So I just want to clarify before I told you this. Your schedule 5, which is your list of capital improvement projects, the first column is what we're discussing tonight because it's happening in 2023. There's also a second column that says this is anticipated for 2024. So if you look at your schedule 5 under wastewater, you'll see that we've listed the 600,000 for this year's wastewater treatment plant. But next year, we threw a $25 million figure in there, because once our pilot is done, we're going to have to build it. And that's the thing we need to talk about bonds for. And you have to have fees for service that can support a bond payment. This number is an estimate based on our experiences of what happened in the water side. So I don't know if that helps you, because I think you were asking like what that was going to cost to do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So any more questions about these wastewater capital improvement projects? Okay, so now we're on to fleet. So as we discussed before, it's an internal services fund. So they are anticipated to begin next year with a negative fund balance of $765,000. So what this means is, because I want everyone to understand that this means that at some point in the past, the general fund covered these expenditures, because obviously those bills were paid. It just means that the fleet fund didn't recuperate that. The general fund didn't recuperate that money from the fleet fund because the fleet fund didn't have the money to pay for it, which means they weren't billing the departments accurately for parts or repairs or overhead. We've solved that problem. That was a problem years ago. So in 21 and inspected in 22, we should not be increasing this deficit. What the city needs to do is prove to the auditors that we are reducing the negative fund balance because you should not be keeping negative cash values on your books for long periods of time. So what happens is that right now I discussed earlier, their fees for service is normally a little bit higher than what is actually needed. And so whatever they bill out in excess of their actual expenditures goes to decrease this negative fund balance, which is what needs to happen. At the point that the fleet fund is net neutral, we will be reassessing our fee structure to make sure that the other departments are not carrying an excessive burden for the services being provided. Did I confuse everyone? Okay, so what we budget for is a net neutral budget, knowing that that's likely not going to happen. But depending on what departments need the most repairs or who has the most accidents, I don't really know where to put that money. So we are assuming that they're going to make 1.153 million in revenues because they've asked for 1.153 million in expenditures. So they should at a minimum be billing out for what they've requested. Of that 1.1 is 192,000 for personnel and 961,000 in operating costs. So they would be net neutral and they would be balanced coming out of 23 if that were the case. So their personnel costs of 192 include a slight salary bump because we are requesting the reclassification of the fleet coordinator to a fleet superintendent. And again, that's because an analysis of that individual's workload has been done and they're actually working at a superintendent level, not a coordinator level. The salary increase is negligible, it's 7,000. Premium pay, 10, and then health and PERS like in the other categories. So year over year, the personnel request is about $24,000. Any questions so far? So the fleet fund has an increased operational expenditures of $6,000 over last year. And that's just because there is a rise in operating and maintenance supplies being requested because they've seen an uptick in the number of services they're providing. So that's really the end of my presentation, but I know Councilmember Orth, you might have had a question about fleet. So do you have a question about fleet?
Gonna try to. So basically fleet owes the general fund $750,000.
No. Actually, if you want me to be fair,
Don't
the
make
general
it
fund
worse.
would have to take the money out of their reserves and apply it to this fund to make it a zero.
I didn't
Because
hear the first part of that.
so this gets really complicated, but the bills have already been paid.
Of course.
They obviously got paid by the general fund, right? But they got booked to the fleet fund because that's where the expenditures happened. So if we wanted to have this fund have a zero fund balance, 700 and whatever that number is, the $700,000 figure,
Yeah,
that would have to come out of the general fund savings account and placed in the fleet fund, like physically, like we'd have to post that transfer
And
so
then
that
turn
the
around.
fleet fund would be zero. And that's technically what the general fund is responsible for covering because the fleet fund couldn't do it. But in the accounting world, we're just showing it as negative cash. We can do that on the short term, but we can't do that on the long term
But you have to zero it out, even without a transfer at some point.
at some point.
Yeah.
As long as we can prove to the auditors that we're chewing down that deficit, like we're making a headway, which we are, then they're not gonna say, you have to make the transfer this year.
You know, we have a similar problem. We had, I don't have it anymore, but education has the same problem. So if you're running dormitories, okay, everybody thinks you make a lot of money on dormitories. You really don't make a lot of money. So you run a, you know, it's like, anyway, you have the same kind of an issue. Same thing on cafeteria sometimes. You know, you don't always make money, but when it's almost a 24/7 operation, like a residence hall is, whatever, you run that. Who pays that? The general fund pays
Yes.
that. Pays that. But you got to show the auditors that you're knocking it down.
Correct. And so I will point this out, and I do not have a slide for it, and it's because the exact same thing is happening on the golf fund.
That's-
So
Right.
you'll see on your schedule 3 that there's a negative fund balance at the beginning and at the end. But we meaning the city council, entered into a long-term lease with Sierra Golf Management. So
Right.
those lease payments that we receive from them, like this coming in 2023, it's $20,000, goes to pay down that negative cash. So as long as that's continuing to happen, we're good.
Yeah.
So that's how that is happening in the background.
So that's happening in the fleet department because the slide I saw,
Yes, because if
expenditures and income
you,
were the same number.
because I don't know how that's gonna play out. But if you went back and looked at the 21 audited financials, you would see that they're negative. I think their negative fund balance at that time was somewhere in the neighborhood of 900,000. They chewed into that by over $100,000 last year, and that's substantial. So if we continued to do that, in basically 5 years, we would
We're
be out of
good.
the hole.
Okay,
Right.
that's what I was,
So it's whatever we come in under in that fund.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
okay, that's what I was basically getting at is there's a light and it's way down over there.
There is a light, and 2 years ago,
because-
you would have asked me this question and I would have said, "Mm," but I'm confident we're aggressively pulling our way out of
Yeah,
it.
they're lost leaders. you know.
Because that's what
Yeah.
it didn't make sense when I saw the two numbers were the same. You can't save them.
I
Yeah,
just
The
don't
two
want to
numbers are the
tell,
same.
yeah, and I just don't want to tell council or the public that it's going to increase because it really isn't.
No,
So at
Cool.
best, I'm going to report that
I'm
we're
good
going
with
to
that.
Got it.
stay the same.
Yep.
Any other questions about fleet budget? Okay, so now we're at the end where you all get to tell me what you like and you don't like. And I'm thinking, and this is just a recommendation, that we can start with the general fund. Because that's where most of your discretionary dollars are. But it's really up to you.
okay. I got a couple that I went through. I'd like you guys to take a look at before you bring us the final one.
Okay.
I like that home incentive project. I wouldn't mind increasing that. And we need to do a better job of marketing that internally as well as externally in the future. The other thing is the water conservation officer and the code violations. Seems like we got multiple people focusing on similar kinds of endeavors, and I'm just wondering if we could do a better job of. Is that something we could put off on code people? I don't know.
Is that something we could put up on what people?
On the
He's
code?
talking about the CSO.
Oh, the CSOs? Yeah, we talked about actually making this part of the CSOs, but if it's a true water conservation, we want to pay for it out of the water fund. If we put it into the PD and they're doing some water along with everything else, it's a general fund expense. So by putting the water conservation officer in the enterprise fund, it doesn't affect the general fund at all.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, are we trying to get the percentage down? And that's what I'm going at. So do we have any evidence that having an officer is going to do that? Get somebody riding around the scooter and
That-
knock on your door or whatever? I mean, are we going to
I
bring
think if
things
people
down or
pay
we?
a fine or two, that's gonna.
Yeah, well, part of the state is there's certain things we have to go around and check and follow up on. This is more for really a tool for us when I engage with the state, because last time we had the drought and we had to reduce by a certain percent. We got some special consideration because we have such large businesses that use water. We're not, we're disproportional for how much water is going to
Sure.
residents versus business. So when we have these talks with the city, one of the things that they had us doing last time, it was required to have a conservation officer. And we just took a body we had and was like, hey, go out and, do some audits and some rounds. And it did help and it was effective, but it wasn't something we could consistently do. So what I was looking to do in this, and we even thought about only doing it part-time, maybe through the hot summer months and not so much in the winter, and see how it goes. But I do absolutely think we'll see a reduction, but is it one? I couldn't tell you the percentage because we're pumping billions of gallons of water a year. And is this, even if we save, 100 acre feet of water, that's 100 acre feet of
Feet of
water
water.
saves, but in the grand scheme of how much water is
Yeah.
used, it might not move that mark much,
Yeah.
but at least that way, when we're dealing with the
You could
state
demonstrate, we say.
and we're trying to support our residents and our businesses with the waters they need, we can say, but hey, we've got somebody going around tracking, making, educating and helping the people. And I even thought we'd go a little bit beyond with this. If we have somebody that well, hey, I don't know how to set my sprinkler or whatever. If this guy's out there educating and helping them, because there's people out there that they can't set a timer for their life.
No,
People
Right.
pay a service to us, they pay for water. Would it be that bad to have somebody go in and assist them or
Would be a great
educate them and how to set their timers?
Be a
Or
great
if they're like,
service.
well, I don't know how to do this, well, you know what? Let's help you out.
And if I
That's
might
kind of
add,
Or
where
fix
I'm
a
going with it.
sprinkler or whatever.
one of the other things I want to add is, when the state was in the critical drought from 2014 to 2016, I believe, and I worked in emergency management at that time. What ended up happening is that the protocols that the state put in place, it said you had to show a reduction of a certain percentage. Many of the agencies before that drought hit went back to their old watering schedules, right? They let you water 4 days a week or whatever the case may be. One of the challenges we had during that cycle was that we never changed our protocols. So we were still under drought restrictions. So we had to ask for special consideration to say, wait a minute, you're comparing usage for these other municipalities that didn't adhere to drought protocols during the same time period. So asking us to reduce further is asking for too much. And so that's when they started saying, well, then what other things do you employ to prove to us that you're conserving? And we're going to have the same battle this time if those same metrics are put into place.
The only other thing I'd like us to see us invest in is some marketing service to talk about what we're doing as a city.
Like a public relations firm type thing.
Whatever you guys, yeah,
So-
I mean, I just think we're doing some good stuff here and.
So
needs to be-
Councilmember Gornick, for the purposes of timeliness, so when you say you'd like to see something increased to the homeowners, do you have a number you'd like to get consensus with council now? Because then we can just take care of that, plug it in and bring it back to you. Because if you leave it on us, we'll come back and say, okay, well, here's,
Well, why couldn't we just give you, I mean, why couldn't we just give you the authorization to exceed what's in the budget to accommodate? So like,
So
so you're saying if we have 7 people apply, but we only have 50, or we
You gotta-
could even
why
come
turn
back to
somebody
council
away?
at a later date and say, hey, we've expended the 50 grand. Do you want to put in another
well, I
30,
mean,
or we could
I
take
would-
it to 100 right now and
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, we could say go up to 100 or whatever. I just think it's a great benefit. I think we should use it. We should explore it.
And that's the purpose of this meeting. I just can't change anything without consensus here.
Yeah.
And so it's either going to be, we leave it as is and we come back to you once that threshold is exceeded
Do
and
we-
ask for
do we have
further.
we have a tuition assistance program.
We
Yes.
do. Mhm.
Okay, and what is that like? What is it? What
it's
is it?
up to 3
Um,
or 5.
I think that gas employees get, what is it, Marissa, $1,500 a year as long as they're in.
700 for what? I mean, once they get the AA degree,
This is for courses toward their associates and their bachelor's degree.
so we don't pay per course or anything like that. We just give them a cash award.
No, we pay per course. So what happens is they apply, but there's a maximum. So if you're part of the gas union and you're taking like undergraduate courses for your AA, the maximum is $700 a year. So you apply, you tell us what courses you want to take, we approve it, and then we reimburse you once you prove you've passed those
But
courses.
what if the certification is $1,500?
We don't pay, there's a cap established in their MOUs because that's a negotiated element.
That'd be next contract.
Okay. That's all.
I think going off what Mr. Gornick was saying, for the budget purposes, we're gonna have to put a number for if we want to change the number for the home assistant prior. It'd probably be better. Do you guys agree that it would be better to keep it at 50 and then come back to us incrementally, or would it be easier to give you authorization up to 100 and then, or whatever? I just made up
I
a
would
number.
prefer it to be established in the budget, and here's why, because when an individual is going to buy a home, let's just say there's not a meeting scheduled, that could delay that. I would say there's two schools of thought on this, and we've never done it the other way, so it makes me a little nervous, but you could say, for that particular line item, go up to 100,000. Or you can say, okay, we know that the increased need next year is 2.5 million, bring us a budget that doesn't exceed 2.7, and these are our priorities. So you are asking for a marketing consultant and you want to increase home buyers. And if we went out and researched what a marketing consultant would be, and doing home buyers at $100,000 is going to push us over 2.7, then we bring you the plan that keeps us at the threshold you set. Not my preference. It just allows more flexibility, and I'm just presenting that as an option.
I mean, I would be comfortable in just giving you a top number and let you guys operate within that. I mean, that's just my preference.
What was, give that guy.
Well, your point was if we said you're going to increase it by 2.5,
Yeah, right now your increased need is 2.5 million, right? So you're pulling from your savings account. If you said, we don't want you to pull from the savings account any more than 2.8, then I know what that number is, right? So I can not manipulate, but I can change some data, and based on your request, we can come back on the 15th and say, this is what we built into the budget per council's threshold.
And addressing the issues that the council might come up with.
Correct. The risk to that is that one of two of you might not agree that what like you might want to see home buyers more and marketing less, but we could always bring it back at a subsequent meeting and fix it again.
Well, the only thing I don't like to see is if you have a increase in people who want to take advantage of a new home, but then you say, oh, no, we ran out of money, we got to go back to next year.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd much rather have the authority to go ahead.
And you absolutely have employees that would take advantage of that.
And that's what I don't want to do. I don't want to say 50 and then 7 people sign up for it, and then you two or somebody has to say, well, your date stamp was at 12 o'clock and that yours was at 12:01. So we're not giving 12:01 money because we're not as busy as the other person to show up and state stamp that or whatever.
And that's legitimately how it is written. First
That-
come, first served.
So for argument's sake, then I don't think we've ever exceeded 5 purchases in a year. So I'm perfectly fine with asking Michelle to take it to 100,000. And if we get to a point where we have 7 applications in, then I'll reserve the right to come back to council and say,
Don't
we're
tell them
already
no,
at
just come
7.
back to the council. Yeah.
Yeah, so go to 100. And if we think we're going to exceed that, I'll come back to you.
I'm good with that. Are you guys good with that?
Okay.
Yeah. And then, but if we have 10 people or 6 police officers that want to do it, I think we're in the okay to play with our savings account. We don't want, I don't think we want 100 people signing up. for
I will
it.
legitimately have to come back if it exceeds this $100,000 and
That's fine.
ask you guys for approval, but that's appropriate. That's what we should be
Yeah,
doing.
but what I'm saying is I don't think my 2 cents would be, we don't want you two to say no to the request, right? Let us,
I'm comfortable that $100,000 will likely prevent us from needing to do that.
Good.
cool.
Based
Yeah, I
on
would-
the
I
num-
would think so.
I'm
too.
cool. I just wanted to make
My
sure
only-
that,
My only last request is to put a little bit more money in the sidewalk coverage there and advertise it.
Okay, so yeah, well, historically, we funded it with 100 grand, which would get us $200,000 worth of work, but I don't think we ever come close to getting enough applicants. So we'll put it out again. We'll keep putting it out, but if that's an ask, we can change that number.
let me ask a dumb question. If we don't get the 50,000, say we do 100, I'm just
Mhm.
saying round numbers, please bear with me. If we ask for 100 and we only get 30,000, could we then spend the other 70 and do it ourselves?
Yeah, so what we do now is when we're down, if nobody's recording, I'll Public Works, Frank, he'll use some of that money towards more ADA compliance. We just add it to basically the street sidewalk budget and we use it
Yeah,
somewhere
good,
else.
As long as we don't waste it.
Well, that's
No
what I'm
way.
saying. I mean, I agree. I don't want to waste it, but I think our key here is we need to fix our sidewalks.
Right,
I think
yeah,
we
so
can
we
all
will
say
use that money if it's
sidewalks.
authorized and we have it to spend. If it doesn't, whatever doesn't get used by the residents of our city, we will use that money towards repairs in town. Yes.
Well, and you know, a priority area really should be for us to be downtown. Our sidewalks downtown. I mean, our sidewalks downtown are not good. you know.
Yeah. I
So
know
it-
they're working on a project that would actually go from business storefront to storefront, sidewalk, curb, gutter, road, all the way through for downtown.
Well, you know, I mean,
We're at the very early stages though, so we're not ready to roll it out because there's some great issues and
Oh,
then
yeah, great
with
issues.
the bulb outs and the 4-inch
Right.
pipe that constantly plug up, all that needs to be reworked. So,
Right.
I
I hear you.
yeah,
Good.
Yeah,
That's great.
that's something,
That's a good.
because there's a couple business owners that have reached out to me that when they put a garden hose in the pipe that goes underneath our planter boxes, the water doesn't go on the other side. So if it's not going on the other side, we all know where it's going. And that day is a bad day when we find out, oops, we should have thought about this a couple months ago. Do we have a snake with a camera? Do we own a mechanism to where we can run a snake down there with a camera?
Yeah, I mean, we track sewer and stuff. I don't know if we have one that fits 4-inch, but what we typically do with those, if you just take a leaf blower, you can blow them out, but to inspect them, I don't know if our cameras go into 4-inch, do they? Okay,
Minimum 4? And that's what those are, right?
I believe they're 4-inch.
Cool, okay. That's, I'm just saying, in front of Newman Garcia, he puts a garden hose there, it doesn't go out the other side. So it's going somewhere. What's what he said.
So, I'm sorry. So I just want to backtrack on a couple of Councilmember Gornick's requests. So the water conservation officer, I need consensus to either take it out, take it to part-time, leave it as is.
I'm okay with what you guys
You're-
want to do. all I'm saying is
Okay.
that, you know, we have a tendency to the
Throw
state
bodies
says-
at a problem.
The state says jump and we say how high. All I'm
It's
saying.
too bad
is-
that they won't fund that.
Yeah.
Well, that's my next,
Well, yeah, it's
Our
our
Unfunded
water meter,
mandate.
our meter people, I don't know what they're called. I don't want to call them what.
our meter readers.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I was gonna say something else,
Do
but
we have meter readers?
we do.
Yeah, but so that's just one duty they have. So
And they're
they're
just-
part of the water department. So they go around and read meters.
And that's
And they
all
will report stuff. If they see leaks or excessive watering, they do take it upon themselves to do it. But it's not really their primary function, and they only read meters a couple days out of the month, and then they go back and do their
Do
rereads, and the
other
rest of the
jobs.
time they're off doing their
Okay.
regular water job.
I'm not against the water conservation guy either. I just don't know if I want a water policeman, but it is what it is. We live in that age. Now, do we track how much water we pump from the ground, store and all that? And then I'm gonna use the word sell because we sell it.
Yes,
We
Mhm.
track that.
yes, we track every gallon coming out of every wellhead, and then what
We
goes
have to
out
report it to the
distribution.
state.
How close are we to the 50 gallons that our person that we,
We're
that loves unfunded mandates? We don't want to report that
We're-
number?
No,
Okay,
we're not
Okay.
there.
I'll be quiet.
So I'm getting the sense that consensus of council might be to leave the water conservation officer as is in the draft budget. Okay, perfect.
And
So
Yeah.
Councilmember Gornick requested like a PR marketing firm to assist us or something to help us get our positive messaging out and let people know about things like the sidewalk repair program and what's happening.
Social media.
Yeah.
everything,
Is
good
there
stuff.
a consensus from this council to add some money for that, or what's the school of thought?
well, we have to pay for it, right? I mean,
Mhm, usually.
it ain't gonna be free. We're not gonna make Michelle do it.
Thank you.
So just to put perspective, I do believe Colinga was telling us that they pay 20,000 a year. But it's an app, it's like a phone app that once people sign up, you can they send basically all their messaging out via text message. Seems like everybody's tied to a phone these days. And I only say that, not saying that's what we would do, but I'm saying, I think for 25,000, we could go out and find some marketing help. I don't know if we would be able to wrap that up by the final budget next week. But if you give us an authorization up to so many dollars, we can plug it in and then come back, because it would be I guess I could sign that one. It'd be
Mhm.
professional. I wouldn't have to bring it back, but if council wanted me to bring it back to tell you how we're gonna do it and what we're gonna do, I would be happy to do that.
And we can then approve it at that point or deny it or,
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
So
does
what is
that,
plug-
does that stay the same amount per year? Or
Well, it would
once
that
it's-
first year.
it's
So
gonna-
I would say let's plug 25 in, and then we'll see what we can do. And my goal would be obviously to not spend 25. If I can find something that meets our need, that you guys agree off, and it's 75 or 10, I'm fine with that, right? I mean, I won't spend it just because that's.
we
our-
have it, yeah.
How does council feel about 25?
I think a maximum of 25
Okay.
is
Sounds
good.
good.
Two,
Good
three.
start.
All
You
right.
okay with that, Patty?
Okay,
Now, one question that didn't come up in this. Don't throw nothing at me, Nathan. League of Cities,
Yes.
we gonna fund that next year?
Yes.
I believe it is still in the
It's
budget,
already
yes.
We
Huh?
left it in.
Mhm.
We left it in. It's 11,000. We left it in.
Okay,
I think we just need to see if we can get more use out of that,
11,000,
in my opinion. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think we
I-
don't utilize it enough.
I agree.
It's worth a
And-
shot.
Now, one question. I have to ask because we're on camera, I guess. Our budget that we spent last year compared to this year, I did notice it went down. Not significantly, but it did go down.
You're talking about the city council's budget?
Yes.
Oh, you're asking for specifics. My brain does not work like that.
Doesn't work that way.
So your budget, adopted budget in 2022 was 119,000. You're expected to spend 131, but that's because you guys authorized that payment for the strategic planning session. So that's where that increase came from. And then we have a budget next year of 96, and it looks like I don't know. Oh,
And the
your
League of
risk
City-
management expense is what dropped. And that's the city council's portion of the general liability and workers' comp coverage. So that's where your decrease came from,
Oh, okay.
not in attending trainings or
Oh,
anything
okay.
like that.
So we did a good job at risk management, guys. What I heard. That's what I was basically asking, because if we're going to do more League of City stuff, that's gonna obviously cost more money.
Some of it
And-
does, some of it's paid for.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
mean-
with your certain membership.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the past councils. past-
Typically, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
Typically, that's paid out of the training budget, and it increased from 3,500 in the current fiscal year to 6,000 in next fiscal year, just anticipating that this council is actually quite active compared to previous councils, and so that affords you more opportunity.
That's what I was.
But like always, if there's something you guys wanted to attend and the budget's not there, then we're either gonna borrow from another department that doesn't need it, or we're gonna come to you and ask if we can dip into the savings account to send you.
Of that savings account word.
I love it.
That's what
I'm
needs
gonna
to
use
be,
it forever.
that's what needs to be used on all of our.
I tried to
paperwork.
use the 5 Bs and be brief, brother, be brief, but it didn't work.
Savings
it didn't
account's
happen.
good.
It's tough with budgets.
I was really hoping it was gonna happen. So the last thing that was mentioned, and I can't remember who, is the sidewalk repair program. Do you guys want to increase that from 50 to something else,
I had
or?
a quick question about that. real
Yes.
quick. So say we increase the budget to 100,000.
Uh-huh.
When would the city use the unused funds? Would it be in the next fiscal year so that we allow residents to use it all year? Or when would that change?
So we can do an analysis like per period, so every month, and see, hey, how many have been used? Because statistically speaking, you're probably not gonna get a whole lot in the winter months, because it's never wet, but it's cold. A lot of our construction happens, in the spring and the summer. But if we've spent nothing by the time we get to mid-year, like January, I would think we could probably safely say that we could use some of that for our own internal use, because I don't think there'd be any possible way that the number of citizens that would be necessary to breach 50,000 when you only get 2,500 reimbursement would ever happen in a 6-month timeframe.
Now, one thing I would also like, and Frank, please forgive me. I'm gonna
He's retired.
feel bad to ask this. Do we have a ballpark figure of sidewalks, miles?
Oh, there was a study done, but
We
I
did
don't.
that on the
know.
PFMDs.
Miles of sidewalk and don't throw nothing at me, guys.
No, we don't have, we would have to get that number.
And then the next big thing is how many miles of bad sidewalks do we have?
All of them. I'm
Not
just
all.
kidding. I
I
don't
did
know.
not want to hear that
It's
number.
recorded. I'm sorry. I was just kidding. I shouldn't do that in a microphone that's being recorded. I was joking. I don't know.
Because I would
Well,
like to
the
find
question
out.
Is really, the question I've always gotten from particularly people in my area is, how do I make it happen?
It's on the website.
The process needs to be a pretty smooth process. I was even thinking if you had a contractor, or a part-time person, or somebody who would be willing to do sidewalk repair, that you could, if they called you, you just send them out there to get it done.
So we do have, so it's on the website and then the manager.
I
The
didn't hear
mic,
it.
Frank.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mike, yeah, we have to
Sorry.
hear it.
So.
The one person at home has to hear.
Yeah, so on the website is where the information's at. Amanda did a really good step-by-step
Marissa, can you go to
process,
the website, bring that up. The
process
sidewalk thing.
of,
Please.
do's and don'ts, who can do what, who can't.
Yeah.
So it's very detailed on answering any question I think that a homeowner could possibly think of, but it is on the website.
Okay.
We do also, in the handout, have a list of contractors that we suggest that they can contact
Okay.
that can do the work. So there's probably, 3 to 5 contractors on that list.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
So
But
they
yeah.
can fill out the form online.
I think we have a fillable, yes, I think the application's fillable, but yeah, there's a lot of good information
Yeah.
in that.
I think some of the individuals that talked to me
Right there.
had a phone and they were trying to do it on the phone, but they didn't have a computer.
Okay, yeah, it's on the website.
And this
It
is a
says
sharing. thing here.
50/50, it's a 50/50 cost
50/50
sharing
deal.
program, right?
Okay.
It's the first thing comes up on the first page, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you pick the contractor, he comes out and tells you it's $2,500,
We will help, and then if it is, then we will share half that cost.
half that cost. So the homeowner would come up
They
with
can do more,
$1,250 and
the most will go is $2,500.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have we bid these contractors out to, do we know what a section would cost?
In there too, I think we have a number that kind of keeps them in check. I can't remember offhand, but we will pay up to like $30 a square foot for sidewalk, and then there's also a lineal footage for curb and gutter.
For curb and gutters, yeah,
just so that
that's
we kind
okay.
of keep them in line. 'Cause
Because
we've
that
had
will
some-
help homeowners say, if the contractor comes out, that's not one of those three and says, hey, I charge $36 a linear foot. The homeowner will know, oh, well, the city will cover, okay.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Cool.
Sorry, Nathan. I just wanted to know how many
No, you're-
miles of sidewalk we have.
Well, I'd have to go look and see how many,
I know,
because
I-
we measure our streets in miles and it's in our reports. I just don't remember it off the top of my head.
No,
So
I,
you can almost double that number. It's gonna
Double
give you a
that,
good
get
idea
real
how
We
many
close.
don't
sidewalk
put the
you have.
date on the website, that's all it says, November
Yeah.
1st, 2018.
oh, yeah.
Okay. Any other requests, consensus for any of the funds of things you want to see amended in the budget proposal that comes to you next Wednesday?
I'm good.
Does the,
We should get paid for all meetings.
Would you like me to increase the
Second.
council stipend?
what about,
Or we should
What
move the
about-
times too.
yeah. oh,
Okay, so
ooh,
before the elections come up, that was actually a question the city clerk had for me and people asking is like, does this council want to entertain changing their times? So when we do run elections, people know like what their times are gonna be, or you want to start earlier in the evenings?
Don't ask Frank.
Well, I would. I mean, for two reasons. Number one, personal reasons, but also I think about the staff.
yeah, that's
I
my
mean,
thing.
Look at these last 2 months. We're gonna have 4 meetings. And so you got staff here, and you've got other staff preparing for these meetings, and things like that. Got our attorney here, so I would just much rather move it up. If that's possible.
Well, that is entirely up to council. So if you don't have to give us an answer now, if it's something you want to talk about at a later date or tell me to put it on a future agenda, we can have an open
Yeah.
discussion about it. And as long as three, you tell
We're-
us to
we're
move it,
talking
we
about the
move it.
election. What was the deal with
They
the
have to
election?
put it, they have to, when they advertise, they have to
Oh, I
say
got
when
you.
our meetings are. So
I
the
got you.
person, if he works nights, he can't,
Gotcha.
he or she may not be. able
Right,
to-
it could affect who decides that they want to run,
Gotcha.
essentially.
I did see in the police department, you made a comment that they've dwindled their, we're gonna call savings account and their bullets and material and
Yeah, their
stuff.
inventory.
Their
basically.
inventory, that's a
Mhm.
better word. In their budget, does it have to help replenish that? Because we do not want to find a day when we do not have
Inventory.
our
I'm actually
equipment
going to
that
have
we
to
have
just-
to have to protect our citizens.
I will answer this generically and then I will ask Captain Ochoa to come up if she has anything to add. And that is our police department is typically very conservative in their asks. However, they will not jeopardize services to the city citizens. So my guess is it has enough that there's a little cushion there. But
I never
Captain
did-
Ochoa, would you like to add anything?
I never thought you guys would not protect us. I just wanted to make sure they had enough in their inventory to where we've had some issues in this country that,
Right.
that has not been for the best. And I would rather reach in our savings account to make sure they had equipment that they need.
Yeah, I can guarantee
especially
you
to go
that the
fast.
PD is comfortable with the amount of money they've set aside for those purchases. Mhm. So that they have ample supply.
We'll open it back up for public comment for this second portion. Is there anybody online that has public comment? No? Council, you have any other comments or requests?
Nope.
All right, well, I guess with that, we will adjourn. You're done, right?
Yeah.
Well, you made me think that you
You're
weren't.
not?
Okay,
Okay,
so
man.
I have one request.
Okay.
That's what we're
Yeah,
here for.
so
I
now
know.
the city manager is nervous and I'm, okay, so you guys know that I wear multiple hats, right? And obviously the first is that I'm the assistant city manager and then I'm the finance director and then I'm the HR person. So we've talked a lot tonight about the fact that it's an increased need and we actually have money, right? At least for now. There was a time in the past where I was really, really worried that we weren't going to have money and that's not now. But we are frequently asked, Mary and I, in negotiations about what our long-term plan is for employees, right? As far as future raises, et cetera. And I understand that's negotiated, so I don't want to get into details. But what I do want to say is that we have a 3-year limit right now on the time frame that our bargaining units can ask for a raise. Many of our local agencies have done class and comp studies. Ours cannot be identical because we're going to compare to other agencies. Does this council, if we want to do a class and comp study and have data and time to negotiate for the 2025 budget, do you guys want to put a class and comp study in this budget so that we know where our compaction is?
What is the cost of that?
I honestly don't know. We haven't really looked into it. It's probably in the neighborhood of 50 to 70,000. I guess my concern is that we do have recruitment issues where we're having a hard time recruiting for positions. Yes, sir.
You know, here's my issue with recruiting. It recruits, it starts inside and then it goes outside. It doesn't start outside and go inside. We start comparing ourselves to other agencies. We all know there's a difference. The difference is what are we doing for healthcare, what we're doing for home ownership, what we're doing for tuition assistance. Yeah, you may not be getting the best money, but we got low crime rates. We got some of the best water in the valley. This is where you want to be. I mean, that, you know, that's kind of where I come from. I don't mind giving people increases in salary, but I like to have a good work environment. It starts here. People need to know that we do a good job in some of those areas.
Yes, and I don't have a preference either way. I'm just putting it out there because there's going to be discussion about it at some point in the future. I mean, that's always something that if this becomes an issue later, we can come back to you and ask you for approval if at that time, and we can do it a budget amendment then, but we're adding things, so I thought I'd ask.
Anybody have any other comment on that?
I'll be the bad guy. It takes it takes a year or so to do this, right?
If you're only doing compensation, I think it's less. I think it's like 6 months or less. But if you're going to do an analysis of your positions, like titles and job descriptions, that sort of thing, that does take longer because they have to do that analysis first and then they do the compensation study.
Let's say there's 8 cities around here. Okay. Is it correct that I could probably get on the phone and ask for the salary schedules of the police, maintenance, water, city management?
Most of them are posted publicly, so you can go on and grab them at any time.
But, well, I mean, you know, it's not rocket science.
Right, we can do it like internally if we're, especially if we're talking about like one position at a time, we do that all the time. Like we evaluate base salary. What the compensation study does that we don't do is evaluate what the monetary value is of all of those things you just discussed, right? And how it affects the median, like your health benefits and home buyers and all of these things that other agencies might not have. So that's the analysis that we're not doing in-house. And it takes a
But
lot more
we should
time.
do it in-house. And I really don't care what other people are doing. I want our people to know what we're doing for them. And I want people who want to come to work here know that we'll help them get a house, we'll help them go to school, you know, a lot of things like that. I mean, that's, got a safe community. That's my 2 cents.
I agree.
Okay,
You may want to open it up one more time for the public since there was no topic discussed.
One more time. Anybody from the public have public comment? No? Okay, well, there's that.
Gavel time.
All right, we will adjourn.
thank you.